Dear viewers, we're still in the book of Genesis, and we'll be narrating to you the sons about the sons of Isaac, that is Esau and Jacob. The story goes like this: that Isaac was blessed with his wife Rebekah with two sons, Esau and Jacob. And the name they do have meaning in Hebrew. When they talk about Esau, it means a man with a hairy body or something like this. And as for Jacob, there is a story to it. They say that they are twins, by the way. So they say that Esau was the firstborn, among those two twins. And when he was born, his twins was holding to his heel or his ankle. So from this, in Hebrew, they got the name of Jacob. These are, just certain terminology related to the meaning of their names. Now we will talk about, we will go a little bit, far in history, and we'll talk about Esau selling his birthright. If we refer you to chapter 25, verse 27, the story goes as such. Esau, he was fond of hunting, while Jacob was fond of farming or agriculture. So one day Esau went for hunting, but he was not lucky that day, and he couldn't come with any hunts. So he came back to his house, and he found his brother Jacob cooking a lentil stew. He was hungry, and he asked his brother if he could share with him, and they eat together. His brother, this is the story says so, exploited the situation, and he made a bargain with him. He said, yes, I will allow you to share with me the lentil stew on condition that you will abandon your birthright, including prophethood. So Esau, he said, well, he's an, he doesn't have that, hopes, great hopes in this life. He is an ascetic. So he said, well, what will I be losing? So he agreed to this bargain, this strange, quote-unquote, bargain. And he abandoned, or he promised his brother that he will abandon his birthright, including prophethood. Anyhow, he enjoyed this lentil stew. But what happened, his family, the family of Esau, they used to make a mockery of him, and they would call him Edom, which could refer either to the lentil stew or to the reddish color, as if they are saying that you have sold your prophethood and your birthright for something as simple and as cheap as lentil stew. Dr. Gharama, as usual, he gives a very thoughtful comment here, and he say, how could this be? How could, we talk such naive, I would say, child story about prophets who are supposed to be among the elite, among the best of nations. So how can we, say that he would sell his prophethood for a lentil stew? This is really incredible. Where is, the depth of the story that those prophets are elites? They are specially chosen by God to give a message, an important message. Anyhow, we will now move to talk about what they called Rebekah's plot or conspiracy, if you like. We refer you to chapter 27 in the book of Genesis, and we come to know that we were told that Rebekah she loved her son Jacob more than Esau. While Isaac, the father, he had inclination and he tended to love Esau more than Jacob. Sorry. So the story goes like this: that one day Isaac, becoming of age, he lost his eyesight. So he told his son Esau, my son, what if you hunt 2 deers for us? Then we will enjoy it. And after that, I will bless you and I will pass to you the prophethood. What happened, the story tells us that Rebecca heard this conversation that took place between Isaac and his son Esau. So she made a plot, as they say, or conspiracy. She called upon her son Jacob and she said, listen, my son, go and get me 2 goats and we will deceive your blind father and will make him feel that these 2 goats are the 2 deers that are brought by Esau. Then they had a problem. The problem of that Esau, as we said in the beginning, he had a hairy body. So Rebecca suggested that he would use a he-goat in order to put it over his body. So he came to his father and he said, Father, I brought the 2 deers. Of course, his father was surprised how soon he managed to do so. But anyhow, he doubted the thing. So usually he touches his son Esau. So he came closer to him and he allowed him to touch his body. And what he was touching really is the he-goat skin. So he was convinced, after all he was blind, so he was convinced that he is Esau. And so the body or the feeling is the feeling of Esau, while the voice is the voice of Jacob. Anyhow, they say that, well, they made this plot. At this time, Esau came back with his hunting. And the father was really surprised. He said, well, didn't you already brought the hunt? So he said, no, I just arrived. So he said, oh, I see, Esau. It seemed that your mother and your brother Jacob had made a scheme, a plan, a plot. So it's over. You lost the prophethood. He said, well, is there any way? He said, well, sorry, nothing can be done. This is the story. The conclusion, as usual, Dr. Gharama, he comes to very thoughtful comments and conclusion, because after all, it's not just mere storytelling. It is just what we learn from these stories. We reach that although narrated events include known figures, when it comes to the figures like Isaac, Esau, Jacob, Rebecca, and so on, yes, they are historical figures. Nobody can deny this. And they are recognized by Islam and Muslims. But the problem is with these events, with this narration, that are not suitable for such elite, for such prophets and messengers and so on. So we come to hear such incredible stories. But again, Dr. Gharama comments that these stories are not in line with God's sublimity and with the prophet's status. Really, it's a kind of degradation if you think about it. And then he continued to say that such distortion either for a purpose or just betraying memory. They depend on the memory, and usually memory sometimes betrays the person. And also it depends on what they call oral, spoken history, rather than registered and written down history. Now we come to the story of Isaac and Jacob in the Holy Book. After discovering this plot planned or made up by Rebecca and her son Jacob, Isaac decided to send his son Jacob and his mother Rebekah. So he decided to send his son rather to Haran, that is south of Turkey. So he sent him to those places to his uncle Laban. It happened that his uncle of Isaac was living in Haran. Anyhow, on his way, Jacob saw a dream, a vision, near Jerusalem area. What he saw a stairway resting on earth while its top reaching the heaven or to heaven. Above stood the God, the Lord. Angels were ascending and descending, on this throughout or on this stairway. The Lord was giving good tidings. The Lord from the top of the stairway was giving a good tidings that Jacob and his offsprings will be blessed. Anyhow, this dream or this vision could be right. It could be right because, as Dr. Karam mentioned, it can be related to a similar story to a certain extent. The story, we have a complete chapter in the Holy Quran called The Night Journey, where we are told that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was taken in a night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then in Jerusalem, he ascended to the sky. So it seems that there exists what we can call heaven's gates, but where are they exactly, and complete or full information about them, we don't know. But it is just kind of a relation or relating this event to that event. Also, he says that we Muslim, we don't have any sensitivity towards any goodness that is bestowed upon any prophet, because after all, it is part of our faith to believe in all those prophets. So it doesn't, hurt us at all. Just the opposite. We don't have any reservation for any prophet enjoying any blessing from God. However, we Muslim, we do object to what has been narrated about Jacob claimed. What did he claim? The story goes as such, that he made a condition. And the condition, is it with a human being? No, it is just with God. God forbids. The story goes like this, that he said that if God, give him provision, that is food, clothes, drink, and he made a vow that he will build a mosque, and also he will pay the 10th, that is the zakah, what they call it. But if these things that he was not granted by God about food, clothes, drink, and so on, he will not execute his vow. This is really a degradation, because how can a creature, even let him be a prophet? He was a prophet, but how can he, address God in such manner? This really cannot be tolerated, by any Muslim, because after all, we are not dealing with two human beings. No, it is kind of a deal between a prophet and the Lord, God. And this is really opposite to what we are told in the Quran about Jacob. Jacob is highly esteemed in the Quran, that we read a verse in the Holy Quran which reads, the translation read as such, and he is of knowledge based on what we have taught him. Talking about Jacob. Not only that, Sarah was told about the good news of his birth, also his name changed into Israel. So his birth was prophesied, So Sarah was given the news, about his birth. So as grandson, the news of his birth was prophesied. When it comes to his name, when it's changed into Israel after Jacob, again, from an Islamic point of view, Israel, it means the bonds of Allah, the slave of Allah. So as if it indicates his worship and his righteousness. So how could a person, a prophet with such characteristics, we put him in a position where he's making conditions on God that if such thing doesn't do, he will never do. This is really a blasphemy and really intolerable, really. Now we come to another story. Here is the story that reminds us of the story of Abraham and the fire when Allah has saved him. Which, as you know, you have been told before, that they just referred this story to Daniel, who came back, who appeared 1,000 years later on. There was a big gap, historical gap between Abraham's day or era and Daniel era. So just they took, instead of telling the real story that it happened to Abraham and Allah has saved him from the fire, they attributed it to Daniel. Something similar happened here between, when they attributed the story that really happened to Moses. When we talk about he was in a strange land, and then he saw some shepherds and he saw some, ladies trying to water their sheep, and he helped them and so on. So they changed the whole thing and they attributed this story to Jacob. The story goes like this, that they didn't, they did similar thing by referring the event that took place with Moses to Jacob, and Jacob continued his, the story goes like this, Jacob continued his trip until he reached Haran. And now, dear viewers, allow me, just in order to be precise, allow me just to read few lines about this story, the story that they attributed to Jacob, which happened to Moses. The story the story, you can refer to it. It is in chapter 29, the book of Genesis. It goes like this. They say, "Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern people. There he saw a well in the field, with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherd would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, 'My brothers, where are you from?' So as an answer, 'We are from Haran,' they replied. He said to them, 'Do you know Laban?' That is his uncle. 'Nahor's grandson?' The answer, 'Yes, we know him.' They answered. Then Jacob asked them, 'Is he well?' 'Yes, he is,' they said. 'And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep.' 'Look,' he said, 'the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture.' 'We cannot,' they replied, 'until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep then.' The story continues to say, while he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob, and here Dr. Gharama made a comment. He said, well, those people, the chief of the films manufacturing or films making, they say that he kissed her. And this is unexpected from a prophet to do such thing to a lady who was not, she was not his wife yet. So again, this is part of the insertion that they put every now and then After all, they are the master of Hollywood, as Dr. Gharama said. And he said, well, this part should be censored. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and the son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, you are my own flesh and blood. This is the story that they say it happened with Jacob. Now we'll move to a question that Dr. Gharama raised. He said, the question says, why they referred this story to Jacob, the story that are supposed to happen to Moses? What did they refer it to Jacob? As an answer to such question, Dr. Gharama comments that because every team of those scribes, those who are scribes, has his own predetermined ideas. So those scribes, some of them, they have their predetermined ideas, and they want to impose and insert it in the book and, make the people feel that it is a revelation. Others are affected by their trend and inclination. So these trends and inclination are reflected on the narratives that they give every now and then, which they wanted to insert. Some of them even forged certain narrations. That is, they made it up, to make them look sound and authentic. And they are not. And that is why in the Holy Quran there is a verse related to this, which says that some of those people will alter their tongues in order to make people believe that it is revelation, while it is not. The translation of the verse goes like this. Some alter scripture with their tongues, so you may think it is from the scripture, and it is not. Now we go back to Jacob and Laban. We were told that Jacob spent 20 years with his uncle Laban, and all events narrated have nothing to do with the supposed event of a prophet. Dr. Gharama made a very thoughtful comment here. He said that if we study these narrations, these stories, we notice that it talks about trivial events. Nothing about the hereafter. Nothing about fasting. Nothing about piety. Nothing about righteousness. Things that are not in line with prophets and messengers. They are just even ordinary stories. Even some of these stories are kind of degradation for those prophets and sometimes for the Lord himself. This story, nothing about God. We hear nothing about the hereafter, nothing about piety, nothing about prayers, nothing about righteousness. To prove this, and then to prove this, Dr. Gharama, he quotes a story of Jacob wanting to marry Rachel. So the story goes like this, that Jacob, he expressed his willingness to marry Rachel. So he talked to her father, and her father said, yes, you tend my flocks for me for 7 years, and then you can marry my daughter Rachel. So after he fulfilled the covenant, the contract or the promise between him and his uncle Laban, he was supposed to marry Rachel. But what happened? Her sister Leah was put forward to him. Again, we leave it to you, dear viewers, to think and about the authenticity of such story. We were told that she had weak eyes, and of course Jacob was really astonished and surprised by such things. So he went back to his uncle and he said, well, I wanted to marry Rachel. What happened? He said, well, my son, our custom, our tradition here, that we first get the eldest daughter in marriage, then the younger one. But he said, well, but I wanted to marry Rachel. He said, well, you have lost nothing if you serve me another 7 years to tend my flocks. you can get Rachel. So he did. He, served him for another 7 years. Jacob asked for a wage in sheep and goats because after giving the service or finishing the service, he wanted his wage. And he emphasized that he wanted his wage in the shape, not rather than currency or money. He wanted it in the shape of sheep and goats. And he said, well, uncle, as for the white-colored goat and sheep, you don't have to worry. All what I want is just choose the spotted, the speckled, and the dark-colored sheep and goats. Related to goats and spotted goats and so on, again, we are told that a prophet made a trick, against his uncle in order to gain more flocks. How can such thing be said? How can a prophet who's been, delegated to deliver the message from the Lord, how can he do such kind of treason and kind of scheme and kind of deception? They say, the story goes like this, that in order to multiply his flocks, he went and he brought kind of green branches, and then he peeled these branches in order to show with stripes, with different stripes, and then he will take these sticks of branches and he put them near the watering troughs where the flocks will come to drink the water. And with the belief, and Dr. Gharama comments that scientifically this is not valid, this is not correct. But the story goes that he did what he did in order to make those animals, whether goats or sheep, be affected by these stripes branches, so they will give birth to striped, spotted, flocks. In this case, his flocks will multiply, and the flocks of his uncle will decrease. As has been said by Dr. Gharama, scientifically speaking, this is incorrect and unproven. It cannot be proven. And also Dr. Gharama, he commented, he said, how could we expect a prophet to commit such deception, for his uncle or for any person, so in order to have worldly gains. It is really inconceivable. Most of them would not accept or believe such stories. To be fair, Dr. Gharama, from his experience, he said, to be honest with you, dear viewers, when he discussed and had a kind of a discussion with non-Muslims, when it comes to such stories, especially the educated amongst them, they wouldn't really believe such stories. Even they will, recognize the falsehood in such stories. Most of them would not accept or even believe such stories. However, they don't read their books. This is the problem. Most of them, we are not overgeneralizing here, but most of them, they don't, read their holy books. And our Dr. Gharama emphasizes that the aim of this course is, to enlighten and to pinpoint to those participants about such stories that can be used in order to clarify truth for truth seekers, in order to clarify certain misconceptions that some of the non-Muslim or truth seekers have. So also he advised the dear participants who are participating in the course that they should not allow despair to creep to their soul or to themselves. And also he said that we notice, if you study what is happening today, you notice that big groups of people, whether individually or collectively, they are reverting to Islam when they come to know about the reality of these of the matter, about the truth. That some of those participants, they say, well, we have tried, but we did not succeed. So Dr. Gharama advised them to revise their tools, their strategy. Maybe they did not make use of the right tools and the right strategy that suits those truth seekers whom they are indulging with. These are very valuable advices, really, forwarded by Dr. Gharama. May Allah reward him. At the end, he gave a very final advice that we should not rush results. We as Muslim, we are asked about taking the means, but the results are left to God's destiny. Now we come to the story of Jacob's escape. Again, another unbelievable thing attributed to a prophet, to Jacob, that he escaped and he betrayed his uncle. The story goes like this. Jacob exploited the absence of his uncle. One time his uncle was not there. So Jacob exploited the absence of his uncle and he planned with his wives to escape, and he did. Rachel took her father's household gods. Her father, he used to have gods and idols. He used to prostrate to them and so on. So she did not approve, maybe she did not approve of such things. So she took these household gods and she hid them in the camel saddle. Anyhow, Jacob fled from his uncle Palan, taking his wives and his slave, all his belonging, his property. And then we were told that Jacob approached Palestine, where his father lived. He was threatened, as Dr. Gharama said, from in front of him and in the back. In the back, after 3 days, as soon as Laban discovered the escape of his nephew with his 2 daughters and so on, he pursued Jacob, and he about to reach him, and he caught up with him, but it was night, so nightfall, and he decided to just stay for the night. And so this is the threat from back, that his uncle was pursuing him from behind. From the front, Dr. Gharama remind you, dear viewers and participants in the course, that you remember the lentil stew when the birthright and the prophethood was taken from Esau. So there is a story between Esau and Jacob, and Jacob was really fearing that his brother might take revenge or so. And although it didn't happen, in the story that will to come, it shows that it did not happen. Anyhow, but still, within his feeling, he noticed that his brother might still, remembering what happened, so he might, take revenge. Anyhow, the story goes that when it was night, Laban, he stayed for the night. So he, and when he slept that night, he saw a vision, a dream. He saw God is ordering him not to cause any harm to Jacob. So as a response, he forgave him. But he insisted, he said, well, Jacob, I couldn't find my household gods anymore. So he told him, well, you can do your investigation, you can search everything. So he started searching. When he came to his daughter's tent, Rachel, she, just sat on this camel saddle, and she pretended that she's passing through her menstruation. So she said, Father, sorry, I couldn't stand up for you because I am passing through the menstruation period. Anyhow, he looked and everywhere, and he couldn't find this household. So he left. He left to Haran. The other side of the story, that the brother of Jacob, Esau, he prepared about 400 men with him to receive his brother. So his brother, in fear of revenge, he did a plan. We call it Jacob pacified Esau with gifts. So he tried to pacify his brother with gifts. These gifts exemplified in flocks. So what happened? He put a flock after a flock in order to get, his brother to forget what happened in the past. So he was, thinking that when his brother will see these flocks, a group after group, he will say, he might ask, oh, for what are these? So he will be told that, well, they are gifts, they are for you. So this maybe will pacify his anger for his brother. So the two brothers met, and Jacob, he told, brother, these are the gifts for you. So he said, no, I don't need, I have enough. But Jacob insisted, and after the insistence, his brother took the gift, and he met him, he embraced him, he kissed him, and what Jacob expected did not happen. Now we come to a story as described by Dr. Gharama. It is the most, or one of the most amazing stories. Really, if it shows something, it shows that the alteration of the text and what's supposed to be revelation, God speaking, is at its best, if we can call it best, exemplified in this story. About the title, Dr. Gharama, he comments that in the Arabic, in the English version, we had explicit title. Jacob wrestles with God, period. In the Arabic version, in fear of that some Arabs will be affected and will object to this thing, so again there were some kind of alteration and distortion. So they did not give the real, correct, honest translation, but they said Jacob wrestling in Phinel, and Phinel is a place. So, there is no similarity between the two titles, although the story is the same. However, the story, remained the same, but the title, for the reason Dr. Gharama mentioned to us, was, the title in the Arabic version was altered and changed. The story goes like this, that Jacob was alone. It was night. Then he met God, and he started to wrestle with him. And at the end, Jacob wins. At the end, yet God dislocated or wrenched the socket of Jacob's hip, so he was limping for the rest of his life. And that is why Dr. Gharama reminds us, that is why the Israelites, they do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, as a reminder of what happened to Jacob when he defeated God. God forbid, this is what the story says. Yet, he was affected in his the socket of his hip, and he was limping for the rest of his life. Then, Dr. Gharama advised all of us, really. He advises all of us that such story should be narrated to truth seekers, people with fair mind, with objective mind, and so on. And he gave experience that when he related such story, most of whom he met, they admitted that it is falsehood. It couldn't be. Others, they might find excuse and they say, well, take it as a kind of joke. It is a joke that maybe God is joking with the Prophet. But again, Dr. Gharama comes to comment, if it's a joke, but here there is an injury, it was, the hip of Jacob was dislocated and he was limping for the rest of his life. So I don't know what kind of a joke is this. Anyhow, it might be just excuse that some people, they do want to say the truth, that these stories are altered or distorted or altered or added, that cannot be believed really. And no man in his mind would imagine God Almighty will come down to wrestle and then he will be defeated. Anyhow, the story continues like this. In this story, God has changed Jacob's name to Israel, which means, according to them, to struggle against God. I mean, we leave it to you, dear viewers, who can struggle against God Almighty? But we Muslims believe that God has changed his name. Yes, it has changed, but to Israel, but to mean the servant of God, rather than the person who struggled against God. Especially when we think about the righteousness of Jacob. Jacob, is a righteous person, but unfortunately he was framed in such, invented stories in a place where he's not that person. Now we come to a sad story. A sad in the sense that the modest and respectful daughter of Jacob, that is Dinah, she was defiled. So the story is the defiling honor of Dinah. Dinah, as you know, Dr. Rama tells us that she is the only daughter of Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons and one daughter, her name is Dinah. The story goes like this. As a reference, Dr. Rama refers us to chapter 34 in Genesis. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, the only daughter among 12 sons, in the way to Ishaq, he stopped in Nablus. So Jacob, in the way to his father Isaac, he stopped in Nablus, and there was a reckless, youth, young man by the name of Shechem. And he was the son of the king of that place. His name is Hamor. So this Shechem, the son of Hamor, he was really reckless to the extent that as soon as he saw Dinah, he was attracted by her beauty. So he defiled her honor and also kidnapped her and kept her imprisoned in his house. Then he expressed to his father that he wanted to marry her. So her father went to Jacob in order to ask him that his son would like to marry Dinah. Of course, the brothers of Dinah, they were filled with fury about what happened. Although their father, he tried to hide the news in order not to create a kind of a problem. And again, we should stop here. How can a virtuous prophet, will keep silent about such thing, a violation of his honor? Because after all, the honor of his daughter is his honor. Anyhow, we leave it to you, dear viewers, to deduce your conclusion. The story goes on that the brothers, they made a plot. They said, we don't mind, that we can exchange, you can marry from us and we can marry from you, but there must be kind of circumcision. That all men of the people of Shechem and his father Hamor should go through circumcision, should be circumcised. So they accepted, both Shechem, this reckless youth, and his father, and the rest, they accepted, and circumcision took place to all men of those, if that's who are related to the place where Hamor is the king. On the third day, while they are still indulged in the wounds, two of the brothers of Dinah, that is Simeon and Levi, they took their swords and they killed all the men, and they retrieved their sister. Of course, Jacob was not happy about this, in the sense that he said, you brought trouble on me and animosity of the Canaanites and the Perizzites. I am few in number, they might kill me. So this was his comment, when he came to know that his two sons avenged from those people, not only Shechem, but the whole tribe. But he was not happy with this. Again, Dr. Gharama raises a question here. Are those scribes conveying the message to us that marriage could have taken place at such event? It's impossible. That a virtuous prophet will accept such thing, that his daughter and only daughter will be kidnapped, will be defiled, and then he will just simply get her married to the person who defiled her honor. The text continues that Rachel gave birth to Benjamin, and she died in childbirth while she was giving birth to Benjamin. As for Jacob, he arrived at his father in Hebron, and Isaac, after his son arrived, he died and buried by Esau and Jacob in the cave of Machpelah.
أكاديمية التعريف بالإسلام أكاديمية التعريف بالإسلام أكاديمية التعريف بالإسلام